All right, well, it is time to get started, and we will pick up here. So over the past, 1 week, and for the next little while on our new quarter, we'll be looking at some of the pictures and some of the stuff from my trip in Greece. And then we won't be in Greece the whole time. We'll go over to some of the Israel biblical archaeology and some of that stuff that I did on my dig there in Shiloh. But the whole purpose of this class, I think, is just to give you some pictures, and by no means are these extensive, but just give you an idea of what some of these places look like, and some of these archaeological findings here that give just some context for what you read about in the Bible. I think it's really easy when you read your Bibles to have storybook pictures in your head of how things are, because that's the things you see, the pictures you see, especially as a kid, are really formative. And I bet that some Bible stories you might picture in like flannel graph type pictures. And I know for me at least, there's one little book series in particular. I'll bring one of these days that is just formative for me about how I think about these places and picture them. But what you get when you go on a trip like this, and not that these trips are necessary or anything like that by any means, but what you get is just a different sense for, distance between these places, and, you look at the view and things are going to be very different city-wise, modern cities, ancient cities, that kind of thing. But the views are going to be pretty much the same. The mountains you see are the same mountains Paul looked at. And like we talked about with a lot of this last week, when you get really nitty-gritty about specifics of like Paul was right here, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be overstating your case. There are some notable exceptions that we'll be talking about as we go on, particularly at Athens and Corinth. But overall, that's probably overstating your case. But you can say with really strong certainty, Paul might not have been like right here standing on that block, but Paul was in this area, and Paul was in this city, and I'm in the place that Paul was in this place. And Paul spent a lot of time here. You get maybe just a snapshot, a sentence or two of what he did in these places, but one sentence can cover a year of time, or weeks or months of time, and so Paul certainly spent a lot of time in these places. They're real places with real people, and these are definitely real events. And what you see in the archaeology is that it just corroborates everything you see in the Bible, and there have been a lot of people that have tried to say, well, the Bible's not true because this or that. And almost always, anytime there's just archaeological excavations, it just solidifies what you have. And a lot of those things are really interesting. So today, what we're going to talk about, just a brief little overview, we're going to talk about Thessalonica and Berea. Whether you say Thessalonica or Thessalonica, yeah. Whatever you say, it's wrong. So I was told very sternly that it is Thessaloniki there in Greece. Anyway, there is our tour guide was a really nice lady, but she had some snobbery, especially about pronunciations. In the city of Berea, it's not Berea, it's Berea, because B and V sounds are very, very similar. And in modern Greece, there's been a shift. And anyway, too much detail. But if you look these places up on the map, Thessalonica or Thessaloniki or whatever is definitely there. You'll see it's spelled very similarly. But if you look for Berea on a modern map, like you pull up Google Maps, you won't see Berea, you'll see Berea. Anyway, so that's what we're going to talk about today, just these 2 different places, and give you some context, some historical context, and why these places are important in Bible times, but also, especially in the case of Thessalonica, post-Bible times. There's some really significant stuff that happens there. So, Thessalonica, or Thessalonica, or whatever you want to say. This is a city that was formed after Alexander the Great was around. So Alexander is the big central figure in all of Greek history, and one of the major figures in all of world history. But Thessalonica was a city that was founded by one of Alexander's generals, a guy named Cassander. And Cassander names this newfound city after Alexander's sister, Thessalonica. It was Alexander's brother-in-law as well. And so it's really a significant place because when Alexander's growing up, he and one of his good old buddies, Ptolemy, it's where they grow up. It's where they learn. And they had a very famous tutor, Aristotle. When you have the best that money can buy, you get Aristotle himself to be your tutor. Ptolemy is going to be a really significant figure who's going to play a really significant role during the intertestamental period. So like those 400 years between the Old Testament and New Testament. When Alexander dies, his kingdom is split and divided, and among his generals, Cassander's one of them. Ptolemy is another one of those. And Ptolemy is going to establish his own miniature empire down in Egypt. And so when you read through Daniel, like we did last week, and it talks about how there's going to be this great king, and then as soon as he assumes power, his kingdom will crumble, and it won't go to his progeny, and all that kind of stuff that we read last week. Ptolemy is one of those guys that's going to be a successor to Alexander. And then you have, in particular, Daniel talks about kings of the north and kings of the south, and there's all these prophecies. Ptolemy is the king of the south that Daniel is talking about, and it's Ptolemy's empire. And the Ptolemaic Empire will exist for a really long time, up until just right before Bible times. Super extra bounty points, bonus points, gold star, if you can tell me who is the last Ptolemy empire. Who's the last king of the Ptolemaic Empire? It's somebody you know. I promise you know their name. It starts with a C, and Cleopatra, yeah. There you go. That's where Cleopatra fits into all of this. And so, so there's, I'm going to get way off track here. This whole class is going to be a ramble session. But in the intertestamental period, you have these wars where Israel's fought between the Seleucids and the Ptolemaic Empire over and over and over again. That kind of sparks the whole Maccabean rebellion and all that kind of stuff. So really significant figure, but this is where he's going to grow up with Alexander. The city is going to be founded in 326 BC, named after his sister. This city is right on the Via Egnatia, which we talked a little bit about last week, and we saw some pictures of it, which is a super, super, super significant ancient road. And the Romans know how to make roads, right? And so it was, it's like the interstate for northern Greece. It goes east to west, connects all these really significant major cities. And this is just a map here. This is the map of Paul's journeys on the second missionary journey. And just from this map, this is, maybe he took a different way, but he probably didn't. The way that this road goes right here, this path, this is following the Via Egnatia. And so Paul lands first in Neapolis. He goes up to Philippi, where he finds who? And who does he convert? Lydia. And then from Philippi, he gets beaten and thrown in prison and all that kind of stuff, makes his way down through here, and then he ends up in Thessalonica, which is his next big stop. And so that's where we're going to pick up. So Paul's first visit to Thessalonica, or Thessaloniki, or whatever you want to say. I don't know. I'm getting myself confused. Flipping your Bibles, look at Acts chapter 17. Let's just read this first story. Obviously, there's going to be a lot. The Thessalonians are a really important church. They get 2 letters, right? 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And really significant church. But they get quite a few mentions also throughout the Bible. Acts 17, now when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica. Look at the map. They go from Philippi down through Amphipolis, down through Apollonia, through Thessalonica. And then where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And Paul went in, as was his custom, and 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead, and saying this, this Jesus whom I proclaim to you is the Christ. And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did many of the devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women. But the Jews were jealous, and taking some wicked men of the rabble, they formed a mob and set the city in an uproar and attacked the house of Jason, seeking to bring them out to the crowd. Now when they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some of his brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have also come here, and Jason has received them, and they're all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus." And the people of the city authorities were disturbed when they heard these things, and they had taken money as security from Jason, and the rest they let them go. And so, really interesting interaction here. Paul goes to Thessalonica. What's the first thing he does? He goes to the synagogue, right? That's what he always does, if there is a synagogue. Remember, there wasn't a synagogue in Philippi, but there is in Thessalonica. And so he goes there and he spends 3 weeks going to the synagogue, reasoning with the Jews, explaining to them. I think it's interesting. He doesn't start with Jesus is the Christ. What is his starting point? He starts with just the Old Testament and says, here is what the Old Testament says about the Christ, about the Messiah. And the Messiah is going to be somebody who's going to die, and somebody who's going to be resurrected from the dead. And then he says, well, good news, I know who that guy is. That guy's Jesus, because here's all the things that happened to Jesus. And then he starts with the Old Testament, reasons, makes a case for Jesus, and then says, Jesus is the one who fits the bill. I think that's really interesting for a lot of reasons, but how many of us could make a good, strong, solid case to people who really know their Old Testament from the Old Testament as to why Jesus is the Christ, right? That, probably not many. So Paul is really in his element. He grew up a Pharisee, right? He knows the Old Testament. And so that's where he begins by reasoning about the Christ and the role that he would fulfill, and then says that Christ is Jesus. Some of the Jews, not all the Jews, believe. And then you have an interesting mix here. What is a devout Greek? Many of the devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women. What is a devout Greek? Yeah, God-fearing Greeks. So you have in this time period, obviously the Jews are people that are descendants of Abraham. You have some people that convert to Judaism. What are they called? Proselytes. What's a really good example of a proselyte in the Bible? Yeah, the Ethiopian eunuch. Somebody who is Ethiopian but has converted to Judaism, and there's a lot of stuff about that in the old law. But then you have some people that are, adjacent to that. They believe in God, the Jews. They just don't want to submit themselves to Judaism and all of its, rules and all of that. And so there's a class of God-fearers, is what they're called in the Bible. And Cornelius is a God-fearer, right? And so there's quite a few. And you see this quite a lot when you look at different synagogues that are excavated. You'll have a lot of Jews that help establish the synagogue, but you'll have those synagogues that are funded by a lot of Greeks and a lot of non-Jews because they appreciate the true God, and they worship alongside the Jews just as like a second-class citizen kind of thing. And very often when Paul's going about his missionary journeys, the Jews are this first place he goes to because he has the most common ground with them. Some believe, but very often it's the Greeks, the God-fearers, that are super receptive to the gospel. And those are the ones that are the most receptive, it seems like. One of those guys is a guy named Jason. With a name like Jason, are you Jew or are you a Greek? That is a Greek name through and through, right? Jason's a really important figure in Greek mythology. You can just tell by the names of these people. Jason seems to have been one of these converts. He takes Paul into his house. The Jews that are against Paul are not happy. They start causing trouble. They stir up a mob. And what's the accusation against Paul? They're acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus, right? Which is an interesting accusation, because I don't think that their primary problem with Paul is that, the Jews are not super happy about their relationship with Caesar, right? I don't think that they're super happy about that. Why do they level this accusation? They're probably not happy because Paul is pulling people away from their synagogue, right? And so let's concoct a scheme that will get not only we're upset, but that will get the authorities upset. Well, let's talk about insurrection, because that'll make everybody upset. Nobody likes it when the one thing Rome wants is peace, right? And so if you want to get people in trouble, just suggest that they are propping somebody else up as king. And Rome does not like that. And so that's their accusation. They get what they want. A big crowd comes and they try and cause trouble. And then finally they're let out on bond, basically. Jason pays them off and they let them go. So not a great first time there. Paul's only there for maybe 3 weeks, maybe a month, something like that, not very long. He comes back in his third missionary journey. We'll read this verse later. It's just as he makes his way back up, he attracts a couple other guys that join him, and he takes under his wing a guy named Aristarchus and Secundus, which are very Greek Latin names. Secundus, like second, somebody's second born probably. And so that's that. But what's the Thessalonian church like? Because I think it's really interesting when you think about these churches that are all throughout Greece and all throughout wherever Paul's going. These churches are incredibly similar to churches today. And a lot of the challenges they face, we don't face the same kind of persecution, not by a long shot. But a lot of their issues are the same issues that people are still facing. So like, they're a church with theological questions, right? Well, good thing that as a church today, we have solved every single theological question, and we have all attained perfect knowledge of, people still have theological questions all the time. And in fact, we still have very, very often the theological questions people have the most are about the same issues that the Thessalonians have. What's like the big issue that the Thessalonians are wrestling with? They've gotten all mixed up about what specific topic? Yeah, end time stuff. Some people think that they have missed it, right? Jesus already came back and they missed it. Some people are thinking that, if Jesus is coming back and those people that have already died, well, they've missed out because they're not going to be here when he comes back. And so they've got all kinds of issues going on. Look at chapter 4, 1 Thessalonians, pick up verse 13. He says, "We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, that you may grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who've fallen asleep. For this we declare to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command and a voice of an archangel and the sound of a trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds, and will meet the Lord in the air, so that we will always be with the Lord. Therefore encourage one another with these words." And so what you got going on is you got a large contingent of the church there that's really depressed because they think all of their friends and family and parents that have died already, even died in the Lord, are going to miss out because they're not going to be alive when Jesus comes back. And so they think that life is all that there is. And Paul says, listen, that's not all there is. You don't live like somebody else who doesn't have hope. Be encouraged by the fact that the people that have already died, we're not going to be cutting them in line, right? God is going to remember them, and they will be resurrected, and they will have the same reward that those that are alive will have. And people today still have all kinds of questions about end time related stuff. We just went over the book of Revelation in this class, and a lot of that stems from the book of Revelation and those sorts of things. They're a church that face a lot of opposition to Christianity. Flip over in Acts chapter 17, back where we were. The very next verse after all of that, there's a mob comes out, they're wanting blood, they let them out on bond. The brothers immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea. The situation's so bad, they can't even wait till morning, right? They paid and let's get gone. And so they go out by night. They're not even hanging around until it's bright outside. Then skip down a little bit and look at verse 13. When the Jews from Thessalonica learned that the word of God was proclaimed by Paul at Berea, they came there too, agitating and stirring up the crowds. And so, it's so bad, this church at Thessalonica, that the Jews that have been, got problems with Paul, they're going to follow Paul and cause trouble for Paul wherever he goes. And so Paul has the fortune, I guess, of being able to go somewhere else. But for that early church, they're stuck there with those people, right? Paul gets to go on, but they live there. And they're supposed to, be ministers in a city that is so hostile towards Paul. They've got a lot of challenges. In 2 Thessalonians, and then we'll get to pictures in a minute, I promise. 1 Thessalonians, chapter 2. We might read all of this, but look at verse 1. For you yourselves know, brothers, that our coming to you is not in vain, but though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi. That's what we talked about last week, right? As you know, we have boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel in the midst of much conflict. For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive, but just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please men, but to please God who tests our hearts. For we never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor the pretext for greed, God is witness, nor did we seek glory from people, whether from you or from others, though we could have made demands as apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, like nursing mother, taking care of her own children. So being affectionately desirous for you, we were not ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you had become very dear to us. For you remember, brothers, our labor and toil. We worked night and day so that we might not be a burden to any of you while we proclaim to you the gospel of God. You are witnesses, and God also, how holy and righteous and blameless was our conduct towards you believers. For you know that like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you and encouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. And so, as Paul begins his letter, he says, listen, when we came to you guys, we were in bad shape. I'd just been imprisoned. I'd just been beaten. We had just gotten out of Philippi. We left a bad situation, came to you guys, found not a great situation, right? We got kicked out of town. You guys were there. You remember. And yet you guys have been great. You guys have been an example of faithfulness. And I've tried not to increase any burden on you. We work diligently, not just with you, but Paul has his own business. He doesn't try and take money from people. Although he could have said, hey, I'm an apostle. You guys owe me a little bit of food money. That's not how he operated. And what you see about these church in Thessalonica is they're extremely generous. 2 Corinthians, this will be our last verse and we'll look at some pictures. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, let me pull this up here. A big part of what Paul does in some of these letters, there's a big famine in Jerusalem, and so Paul collects money for disaster relief to send back. And look at how Paul talks about the churches in Macedonia. Thessalonica is one of these churches. We want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means, of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. And this, not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us. And so, he says, these Thessalonians, they gave not only because, I asked them to, but they gave willingly, and they gave way more than they should have. They are in extreme poverty. They are living under a unfriendly regime, and yet they had the kindness and generosity to give and give way more than they should have. They were begging for the opportunity to serve and begging for the opportunity to give, despite their own poor situation. That's the kind of church that you have at Thessalonica. And I think that's a really interesting, it's a very, very good church that you have here. Thessalonica is right on the ocean, and straight across you can see Mount Olympus. That's what that snow-peaked mountain is. Mount Olympus is where Zeus lives, right? And so you can imagine paganism, Greek culture, all of that, it's going to be very strong in this place when you can look right across the bay and you see the place where the gods live. It's snow-capped throughout much of the year, if not all of the year. Super, super tall mountain. Really pretty. Thessalonica is a really deep water port, which is really significant because it's a major trade hub, right? It's the biggest city, the wealthiest city in that part of Macedonia. And today it's still a super, super important city. It's the second biggest city in Greece. And so deep water ports mean you got a lot of money coming in, a lot of goods coming in. And so it's a rich, rich city, but you have poor Christians, right? So what explains that? Why do you have a poor church, a church in extreme poverty when it's a place of such wealth? Rich people don't feel like they need God quite as much. That's pretty much a universal truth. Big statue of Alexander the Great, because this is where he grew up. There's a lot of patriotism about that. Alexander riding his big old horse. That statue is enormous. Can't even comprehend how big it is from that picture. This is a statue of good old Aristotle, his tutor. This is a side note, but right across the street from here, I had a food that changed my life forever. I had lime sorbet, and it changed me. I'm a changed man. It is not sherbet. Sherbet and sorbet are not the same thing. Excuse you. Good question. Yeah, he might have been assassinated. He might have had just a disease, maybe malaria, but it's a famous mystery. This is the agora at Thessalonica. So this is actually a 2nd century agora. So the challenge with cities like this is it's a modern city, right? And there's apartment buildings right there. And this agora is not the extent of it. It goes directly underneath those hotels, right? And those apartments. And so you can excavate some, but you can't just excavate willy-nilly wherever you want, whenever you want. Yeah. Agora is a marketplace, right? It's like we looked at that in Philippi. This is a better shot of the same place. So even underneath it right there, those little arches down there, those are like little storefronts where Paul gets his funnel cakes. But you have, it's the big marketplace. It's where everybody goes to get their food for the day. It's where you go to listen to people give speeches. It's where you have public entertainment. I think in this picture you can see, that back corner you can see a little bit of an amphitheater type thing. It's just it's the central hub of the city. Everybody goes to the agora every day if you're going to go out in public. Do what? Yeah, they still do have concerts sometimes. A little bit better shot. You can see the different stalls that are there, which is kind of cool. This is my favorite picture. This is the public toilets. Yeah. Yeah.
Wait, I'm confused. Explain what I'm looking at.
These are toilets. Yeah.
You're above it looking down?
Yeah, I'm above it, yeah. But you go in your little booth and you squat. Yeah. Yeah.
Where they put like faces and fires and stuff.
Yeah, you would,
Each of these are
yeah. You have like a little, you keep a fire under there, you have a big cauldron or whatever, and you ladle out your soup or whatever it might be, or maybe it's full of spices, and so your big cauldron doesn't roll away.
Where they dug into the dirt, so they're like big faces, wooden
Yeah.
timber.
And keep things relatively cool and that kind of thing. Yeah. But there's your toilets, in case you ever wondered where Paul went to the bathroom. Maybe there. But Thessalonica, so that's about all you have about Thessalonica in the Bible. But after the Bible, it's a really significant city still. It's significant in the 300s. You have the first real major empire-wide persecution of Christians by Diocletian, Emperor Diocletian. Diocletian also, so he makes it completely illegal wherever you are in the Roman Empire to be a Christian. He also divides makes a formal divide between the Eastern Empire, the Western Empire, and he sets up a tetrarchy, ruler by four is what that means, with like a junior Caesar and a senior Augusti is what they were called. So basically you had like president, vice president, two different presidents and two different vice presidents kind of thing. Can't imagine any problems would come from that. But anyway, you have a Caesar. Thessalonica was like the headquarters for the junior of the Eastern Empire there. But you have a guy named Galerius, Caesar Galerius, who was the first to legalize Christianity in the Byzantine Empire, which is a really significant deal. He does that in 311. He dies like right after, and it doesn't quite get enacted. And so right after that, you have Emperor Constantine in 313, who has the Edict of Milan, which does actually legalize Christianity. And so Christianity becomes what's called a religio licita, which means a licit religion. So it's not illegal. It doesn't mean that it's like anything special. It's just you can't persecute a Christian for being a Christian in the Roman Empire. It's the same status that like Judaism had in the Roman Empire. But all that changes in Thessalonica with the Edict of Thessalonica in 380 with Emperor Theodosius, who then makes Christianity mandatory in the Roman Empire. And so that's when you have a really big shift. Like when do people talk about like when does the Big C Catholic Church start? Well, it kind of starts here, right? This is the marriage of church and state. And so really, really significant stuff happens here. And then modern Thessalonica is the second biggest city, about 1.2 million people. This is the Arch of Galerius, which celebrates his victory over the Persians. It's really big. Hey, I know those people. But really big, really cool. Look at the detail. Like imagine carving that out of marble. Like that's just nuts, right?
Not modern tools.
Yeah.
That's
Like
what's crazy.
chiseling it by hand. That's absolutely insane. Okay, so Berea. In your modern maps or whatever, it will say Berea, not Berea. Paul's visit there. Berea is a city about 25 miles southwest of Thessalonica. We'll look at a map here in a second. Let's pick up back in Acts 17 and pick right up where we left off. Verse 10. The brothers immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea, where he arrived and went into the Jewish synagogue. That's what Paul does, right? Now these Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica because they received the word with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. Many of them therefore believed, not a few of the Greek women of high standing as well as the men. And when the Jews from Thessalonica learned that the word of God was being proclaimed by Paul at Berea, they came there too, agitating and stirring up the crowds. Then the brothers immediately sent Paul off on his way to the sea, but Silas and Timothy remained there. Those who conducted Paul brought him as far as Athens. And after receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they departed. And so Paul comes to Berea, and at Berea, he finds a lot of these Jews that are more noble than the Thessalonians. What does that mean? What does it mean that these Jews are more noble? Well,
I don't think it's like a royalty thing.
yeah. So,
assumed it was just because they were
Yeah.
studying the scriptures daily.
yeah, it's an expression, right? Literally, the Greek word that's used there is the word we get eugenics from, which is kind of funny. They have better genes than the Thessalonians, but it's talking about their attitude, right? You know, they act like, you know, they act nobly, they act well, they act respectful and virtuously and all that kind of thing. Because rather than Paul's reception at the synagogues in Thessalonica, where he's chased out of town, had a lot of fighting, these guys are like, hey, well, let's actually see if what Paul's saying is right. Let's see if he's telling the truth about these things. And so because they were willing to engage with what Paul was teaching, Paul has a lot more success there at Berea. A lot of Jews believe. And not just a lot of Jews, but a lot of Greeks and women of the Greeks believe as well. And so Paul has a lot of success there at Berea. But problems come, right? Because you have those Thessalonians that got mad, they want to come down and stir trouble. They traveled 25 miles from Thessalonica to Berea to chase Paul out of town a second time. 25 miles is the distance from here to Cleveland, on foot, right? Like, imagine how that conversation went. And it is super hilly. Like, there is not a stretch of flat ground. You know, they're on the road, and so maybe a little bit faster, but it is not an easy path.
It was forever in the bus, and I got so motion sick.
Yeah.
It was up, down, all around mountains.
Yeah. But imagine how that conversation went. Honey, I won't be here for dinner. Where are you going? I'm going to go chase Paul out of town. He's back? No. He's 25 miles away. When will I see you again? I don't know, like a month? Like, you know, somebody had that conversation. But apparently, quite a few of them did, because a lot of the Jews there in Thessalonica, they're upset. And so they go down 25 miles on foot. Maybe they had a horse. Maybe they had a donkey. I don't know. That's a long way either way, to go chase out Paul. That's how mad they were about what Paul was teaching. And so after some time Paul teaching there, you know, take time for word to get back and then for them to get down. And I don't know how much time he's there. Maybe a while, maybe pretty short. I don't know. But he gets chased out of town again. And so from there he goes, and you can see he goes to the ocean, and then he takes a boat and he goes way down south to Athens. And we'll talk about Athens next week. But, you know, how much do you have to hate somebody to not only kick him out of town once, but to then go, like, walk to Cleveland to kick him out of town again? Yeah, hike, you know, crazy, right? So in Berea, modern Berea is like one of the prettiest places I've ever been. It was so pretty. So is Neapolis. There is not a lot of archaeology. There's just very little. We only spent just like a couple hours there. But we went up there, and there's this really pretty place, big statue of Paul. He looks kind of ugly. He had a really long, weird neck in that statue. Right where we were there, you can see Claire right there. Right when we were there, there was the middle of a Greek Orthodox Mass on like Tuesday, which was kind of weird. I love a good mosaic. But this is, as far as archaeological stuff goes, this is the most significant find there as far as implications on the Bible. So it's called a stele. It's just basically a big pillar column, and every inch of it is written in Greek right there, like super close. When you talk about like what the Bible is written in, biblical Greek is written in all caps with no punctuation and no spaces between words. So it can be a pain. But that dates right around maybe just a little bit before the time of Paul. So maybe that was something Paul saw. But what's significant about it, one of the challenges when you are working with ancient texts like the Bible is how do you define words? Because words have meaning only in the way that words are used, right? A collection of sounds in of itself does not have a meaning. So just for example, imagine that you are living 2,000 years in the future and you are reading something that talks about teenagers. How do you know what a teenager is? How would you define a teenager? But don't use, somebody between 13 and 19, because we don't talk about teenagers like that, right? If you're writing something down, it's like, the teenager said this. You got a problem because nobody says the teenager who is between the ages of 13 and 19. But we know that it means a young person, but we don't, just from context clues. But how would you even define that, right? That's a challenge. And there's a lot of words in the Bible that you may have used, and you may understand what it means, just not specifically what it means. Like, what is a teenager, if you don't know the exact definition of a teenager? Well, anyway, why this is important is because this tells you what a teenager is. This is gymnastic, you might see gymnasium there. You have lots of games that take place in ancient Greek culture and that kind of stuff, like Olympics and all that kind of stuff. What this does is it's a list of rules for how to participate in all these different athletic games. And interestingly, this gives you age brackets and with defined ages. And so in 1 Timothy 4:12, Paul says, "Let no one discourage you, Timothy, for your" what? Youth. What is a youth? It's a word that only appears once in the Bible. And I don't know, youth is a very broad term. Our youth group here is, from 6th grade to senior in high school. That doesn't mean anyway, it's a nebulous term. We know what it means, but we may not know what it specifically means. Well, this tells us that a youth is somebody between 20 and 22, 23, something like that. And so, when Paul says that term, only because of your youth, it's not that significant, right? It doesn't change what you believe about the worldview shattered about who Timothy is. But what it does is it just gives you more information that helps clarify details about the Bible, because it uses that same term that Paul uses. And so that's probably the most significant archaeological find there in reference to Bible. It's not that significant, but a lot of what you find in archaeology is things that may not have specific, direct application to something in the Bible. It may have tangential relation to something in the Bible, kind of like this. And there's tons of that kind of stuff. So another good example, these are household gods that were recovered from a tomb in Berea. There were a bunch of tombs, a big cemetery that was excavated in Berea. In Greco-Roman culture, specifically Roman culture, every single Roman house just about would have what's called lares or something like that, depending on how you want to pronounce it. But what that was is basically a little shrine in your house where you put your household gods. And those household gods are the ones that are the guardians of your family and whatever it might be. When you think about what Paul's facing as far as the paganism, everybody not only just goes to these pagan temples to worship, but most of pagan worship happens at home, right? You have dinner and you offer the pagan statue god in your household who's in your living room, you offer him some of your food. That's standard practice. And these were little household, I don't know who they depict or whatever, but that's the kind of thing you'd have in your living room. They're just this big. Yeah. And a good example, so when Paul goes to Ephesus and they get really mad at Ephesus, who specifically gets really mad? Demetrius, who his name is kind of interesting, but what is Demetrius' job all about? He's a silversmith making what? Idols, right? He's not making probably, big old idols for temples. He's probably making tiny little idols and trinkets and doodads for people to put in their house. And so Paul, when he begins to convert people, they chuck these out of their houses because they don't need them anymore. And so Demetrius gets upset because all these little idols that I'm making, nobody's buying them, and you're upsetting the economy. You have something?
Yeah, so they didn't invent this though. Rebecca stole all of Laban's.
Yeah.
She left.
Yeah, you have these also mentioned in Genesis, I think 31. They're called
Way predates this.
Terazim or something like that. But it's mentioned that Jacob has household gods in his household. It's like, what are you doing, Jacob, with the household gods? Yeah.
And Rebecca stole all of them, hid them under her cloak, and said, I'm on my period, you can't look.
Yeah. But yeah, this is super commonplace. You got some ancient Greek pottery, some old swords that date around this time, spearheads, some old people looking at you from their sarcophagi. So, sarcophagus, by the way, the word means flesh eater. It's where you put a person to have their flesh eaten. So, yeah. Anyway, there you go. On that happy note, next week we'll talk about Athens.